Welcome to NIRO Knowledge.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of NIRO Knowledge. Guest today, I feel like we're on repeat. We have John Eng and Lorna Ferguson. Just babbling wrongly here. I'm cold, apparently, in the cold of New Hampshire. John Eng and Lorna Ferguson from Canada. They're going to speak to us about missing persons today and some of that research that they have going on as a collaborative effort. I only say on repeat because John also followed Dr. Laura Huey in last year's lineup of episodes. So worked out pretty good, and Lorna came into the picture later on, talking about another missing persons research, but we'll jump into that today. They will go over some of that conversation, as well as speaking actually to, and as I spoke with them a little bit earlier, speaking to how analysts can also help researchers. So we'll get a little taste of what you may be in store for if your agency gets tapped, in a sense, by a researcher to get some of that data, maybe some tips on how to work that out and maneuver through with the researcher and see what they might need and what you might be able to help them with. So with that, I will let you folks take over. Lorna, why don't you go ahead and start, jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then get started into why this project started. And John, we can fold you into that mix as well.
Sure. Just to preface, I live in the middle of nowhere, so my internet might cut out. You folks might see me making a face and frozen, and if that's the case, I'm sorry, but I'll try my best to not freeze and keep this conversation going and flowing. But yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm in my second year of my PhD now, and my dissertation is focusing on police responses to missing persons. Outside of my schooling, I'm also studying missing persons across Canada, so it's a kind of large-scale national project. Through my dissertation work, I'm interviewing police personnel from across Canada. I think I've hit like maybe 35 or so police services in Canada, so we're definitely getting a good outreach there. But one of the things that came up in those interviews was analysts and their role in police missing persons work, and that's what we hope to talk to you folks about today, and that's where I roped John into this project. So I'll give the floor to John now, and he can introduce himself if you'd like.
Thanks, Lorna. Yeah, so I've been a law enforcement analyst for well over 10 years now. I'm also the Director of Operations now for the Canadian Society of Evidence-Based Policing. I'm also the International Association of Crime Analysts, their Publications Committee Chair. And I've been doing that for the past couple of years now or so. So in terms of like my typical kind of day-to-day crime analysis work, that's kind of one piece of it, but the other piece of it is like my continual advocacy towards crime analysis and the relationship with evidence-based policing. And so I found that it was a very natural kind of partnership between a crime analyst and a researcher. So, and that's something that I've always been wanting to kind of push more towards. And I would encourage my counterparts as crime analysts to do the same thing, because we're speaking the same language. So, and we have very similar interests, and we've got a very strong technical background and our knowledge of policing culture and institutions. So I think we definitely have an opportunity to work on.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's great to have you guys back on again, because I see this so well. Somehow I got lucky and tapped into your network and realized how cohesively you guys end up working, how that network out really seemingly become a nice little piece of success. And as it begins to kind of radiate through the rest of Canada, it seems like at this point, which is a great thing. So thank you for being on and sharing all this. So let me jump back to Lorna. Why missing persons? So anybody who's jumping into a podcast with you for the first time, and we spoke about this your previous episode last year, but why study missing persons? What is this for you for that study?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a little bit more open the more comfortable I get with my research topic and talking about my own experiences with missingness. So I come from a more disadvantaged background. I've had kind of like a rough upbringing. And so part of that was that I went missing several times myself as a child. And so as a teen and then moving forward thereafter, and my passion really comes through in trying to do better for missing people. And one of the areas that intersects that is policing. And I've always been a big advocate of law enforcement and wanted to get involved in policing work myself. But I wanted to do more research than it would be actually an officer or engaging in that law enforcement side of things. So I had the intention of being a crime analyst myself. And that's where I wanted to go after my master's, but my supervisor, Dr. Laura Huey, wrote me in to do my PhD. So here I am. She's pretty convincing. I think everyone knows that. But so with my history, I have that kind of unique experience of actually understanding it from a different perspective. And then I'm also, again, passionate about evidence-based approaches to policing and trying to advance the state of policing across Canada. So those two kind of join together into my dissertation topic. For missing persons specifically in Canada, there's just not a lot of research. There's not a lot of research from different topics. The theories, the connections, they're all very lacking and underdeveloped. And I'm trying to contribute to advancing the state of Canadian scholarship in this area. And along with that, contribute to advancing the state of policing. And I did that a lot through the Canadian Society of Evidence-Based Policing. I'm actually the former John. I was the director of operations before John took over from me, and I left that role to start up the Missing Persons Research Hub, which is now a national research forum and networking site for the field of missing persons. So longer story shorter, I have experience personally, and I have a passion for it. And then I also want to do better for these two realms of the world, or I guess Canada, that I'm interested in doing better for. So that's how it
awesome.
comes together. Yeah.
And I think it's probably good in a sense for the research itself that you have such a passion for, because as anybody who's listened to Dr. Laura Huey speak, she involves herself the same way, that her passions come from her past as well, and in bringing those forward and trying to help in a greater scale, which is awesome. You mentioned though that you basically have some affinity in some realm, right, of law enforcement. Was there something during those times, I just have to ask because I'm genuinely curious, and I think everybody else is too, especially in this era here in the States, where there's some conflict and negative outlook towards law enforcement itself. Was there a moment in time that helped you during your times of missing person where you interacted with law enforcement that actually was that positive click that gets you to do, I guess, both of these in a sense at the same time, or at least, help out law enforcement with this research?
Yeah. Two kind of shorter answers to that. So my family, some of my family members do have a background in law enforcement, and so part of my upbringing was understanding that law enforcement are your friends and your family, and they're there to help you. And so with that knowledge, when I did go missing, I always found that police were there to help me. I never found that they were, there to harm or hurt or make the nation worse. I always had extremely positive experiences with them. I always found that they got me on the right path. They got me into a better environment. They were willing to help me out, and they always checked in on me, even if I wasn't, reported missing at that time. So I think I'm lucky in that I had a lot of great experiences with police, and I know some people haven't, but that's where my advocacy for police comes in, because I had officers who were trying to do a lot of great work, and that they were helping me. They really did help me get on the right track. And then, of course, my family members themselves being in law enforcement, they made me aware of how they can be family and friends, like I said. So for myself, I've had a lot of positive experiences with police and law enforcement more generally, and maybe that's a privileged position, but I do, I can't say that I haven't had any negative experiences. And then taking that forward into my current work, every single officer that I've met that's involved in this work is extremely passionate, extremely involved, and they're also doing a lot of like a lot of them are agents of change, trying to do reformative work in their institutions as well. So positive from the beginning till now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I believe that's usually the case across the board, is everybody tends to have the positive experience, and either somebody on a bad day or whatever circumstance it might be. We're all human, but tend to have some negative experience, and then obviously I think we, as a society here, at least in the States, we tend to try to push, unfortunately, that trolling aspect, that negative twist on things, and that's the one little moment that paints, unfortunately, the bad picture of everything. With that, John, your involvement in this research project, how did you get roped into this? I'm guessing Lorna pulled a Laura Huey and actually roped you in.
Very convincing. Yeah. I guess the way it started was actually, it surprised me, but in a really good way, because like I said, I've been in law enforcement analysis type work for well over 10 years. And I knew that Lorna was interested in missing people work, but I think both of us didn't really realize that there was a connection between the two of them. And she wrote to me one night, and she had said, "What about this connection?" And I thought, it's odd that it didn't click into my brain, because to be quite honest, and we've kind of been noticing this kind of work in terms of our preliminary findings, it's like a hit or miss. Like, I've personally never done any missing people type of work. It doesn't mean that it's not possible to do any of this stuff. But I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about our preliminary findings like a little bit later, but it really is dependent on what you really want your analyst to do. Like, I'm doing like a million different things all at the same time, but the reality is that unless you've been dedicated to a specific unit, unless you've been dedicated to working with investigators, missing people, unless your agency specifies that it's a priority for your agency, it just sits on the side of your desk. Like, I could technically be doing missing people work if I really wanted to, but really, yes, it is a priority for my agency, but it's not the main thing we're going to be working on. And if my supervisors were the ones that were to say, "You know what, John, this is a priority for you, this is what we're going to be doing with our department, I need you to emphasize and work on this on a continual basis," then yeah, of course I'd be doing it. But as we've noticed, like in our preliminary findings, it's really a hit or miss. So I mean, it was exciting for me to be able to partner with Lorna because of her background and understanding for missing people work. But my expertise in this partnership and in this project is really about what aspects can we demonstrate to showcase, relationships in terms of like, the culture of policing, the role of policing, or the role of an analyst within policing as a whole, a whole bunch of other things that I've read before in other pieces of literature that really surprised me in terms of like how it matches so well with. This is just one example as to how it supports everything that every other scholar has spoken about with respect to crime analysis.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great piece for everybody to take away at this point, is the fact that this cooperative function between research and analytics is not only mutually beneficial, but can just generate so much more evidence-based policing and practices at that point for the rest of us to try and follow and utilize as strategies within our own agencies at that point to be more successful. And I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a crime in Canada, but missing persons, outside of being a kidnapping itself, isn't a crime. Somebody just goes missing, right? But it's so it can be so impactful, not only for the person missing, but for everybody else around them. So there's in a sense, a quality of life issue that needs to get addressed. Actually, I don't even know what that third category would be, because most law enforcement deal with either a crime or a quality of life issue, and whether it rises to the level of a crime ends up being the question, right? I mean, people speeding on the road, or people shooting guns in all hours of the day and night, and whatever circumstance it might be. But this ends up being something a little different. Like, you have now this concern for somebody's well-being. And so I guess, so with that, let's just jump into, so Lorna, you're starting this project, have this project going. What is this project you're doing now for missing persons?
Sure. So, I mean, as we talked about, missing persons, going missing is not a crime. I think I've said it before. Like, I could literally shut down my laptop right now, turn off my phone, leave my environment, and leave and never come back. And I can do that at any point in time. Obviously, I have responsibilities in terms of, companies I'm connected to or institutions I'm connected to, but at the most basic level, I can leave at any point in time, never talk to anyone again, and it's okay to do that. It's not illegal. So that's when, we hit that issue. Is it a policing issue? Is it a healthcare issue? Is it a social services issue? And as we know, police are the people that tend to respond to missing persons reports. And so what I'm trying to do with my national project is carve out a space for missing persons in the field of policing, because it's an issue that police are dealing with, and they're facing, and they're not equipped to, with the lack of information or the misinformation, the lack of support, the lack of awareness of how broad or the scope of the issue, and just the general underfunding of research on missing persons. And so where I come in is trying to approach it from that broad lens to tackle the variety of areas that could be contributing to police missing persons work. And in my interviews in that broad project, I think I've interviewed about just over 100 people, and three officers. One of them was a chief, another was a search and rescue person, one was a frontline patrol. And these three people brought up that analysts were called into the report at different times to generate patterns, especially for repeat cases. One of the chiefs said, we should be utilizing them more. We can get reports from them, but really they're pulled into the last possible moment, or when there's not really anything that you can do to contribute to the investigation or the search. And bells went off for me, because I thought, and I know with John, him and I have talked about carving out a space for analysts too. So we're doing it from two different sides of the coin here. And like I said, bells went off, and I thought, what, John would have something to say about this. And so I reached out to John and said, John, about starting a project looking at the role of the use of barriers to the role and use of crime analysts in police missing persons work. And he was like, yeah, I've never thought of that. Definitely, because everything that John's been involved in relation to evidence-based policing is parallel to what I'm doing in missing persons work. And so the project essentially is looking at, like I said, the role, the use, the barriers to crime analysts getting involved in police missing persons work. So that's where John and I are, and it's a survey, basically an online survey that anyone can. And so we've reached out to a good number of people as it stands right now, but we obviously always want more participants. But maybe I can give the floor to John to talk more about his role in the project. Would that be okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so in terms of where I was able to contribute for this project was about some of the survey construction pieces. So, I mean, we did talk about pieces of like missing people work, like that's obviously not my background, but I was able to help out in terms of like identifying certain types of questions that would be helpful. So we kind of wanted to see exactly kind of what the scope and breadth of, analytical work with respect to missing people. We also wanted to find out whether, missing people work was a priority, because we know from previous work that the work that analysts do is really tied into what the organization feels as a priority. I also wanted to understand a little bit more about how I understand, like, for a lot of analysts, like, one of the biggest struggles that we have, it's not the right word to say like convince, but really educate police officers and policing as a whole as to what the capacity is for analysts and try to demonstrate some of that stuff. So I wanted to give the space and opportunity for analysts to kind of explain from their perspective, what do you feel as though you could contribute to a missing person file and just generally missing people work? And then I also wanted to kind of take a peek at what some of the boundaries were to see whether or not any of that was related to the typical stuff that we would end up seeing in other pieces of literature. And you know, it was no shock to me in terms of like the things that we ended up finding, but that was the cool piece too, is that what I'm hoping for with any of the research that I'm planning to do is not only highlight the profession that I've been so passionate about for a number of years now, but also explaining to executive staff that this is just another primary example as to where analysts are not utilized at their maximum capacity. And these are additional opportunities as to how you can benefit. So in addition to, you know, the stuff that Lorna's been working on, this is just another opportunity for them to say, you know what, we have a better understanding as to the scope of what missing people work is about. And these are the potential gaps that are happening. But I'm going to go back to my analyst and let's see what we could potentially do about that situation. So that's kind of what my whole purpose was to carve out what the current state of crime analysis work is with respect to missing people, and use that as like a platform to create like a call for action.
Yeah, that's the way you guys talk about it. I really love the way this dynamic starts functioning, because throughout the podcast, I've spoken with so many different people, several analysts, and plenty of academia. And I know some people have done something similar in a sense, right? Where the researchers, they're working with either the analyst or the police department, the agency, to get that data. But at the same time, this dynamic that you guys speak of is very motivating, and should be, I think, for a lot of analysts, because it can not only, as you mentioned, John, help boost the idea and understanding of what analysis is and should be in an agency, as well as what more can we do. And I think a piece of that, though, will end up being, hopefully, what can we get rid of as analysts, right? I mean, just the generic number dumps sometimes that we do is just useless, right? And if we can focus on helping to find a missing person sooner than later, or whatever other research comes out of that, some of the mental health that I know you folks and some of your peers and colleagues are doing in that realm of research, and actually just affect a better societal change, right? And grow that within the culture of the law enforcement agency, the police dynamic, and get it kind of back on track as a service-based, and dealing with a little bit more than the criminal aspect. I think it's fantastic to listen to you guys talk about this and how it all works collectively between the two of you. And it's, again, amazing to see how, you know, and I don't know how you met, how you joined forces in a sense, became friends, etc. But knowing that you can go to each other and this project is coming out of it is fantastic. So with that, I know there's some preliminary findings that you guys want to talk about with what you have going on. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, if there's a piece I'm missing of this, but if you want to jump into that aspect of it.
Want to jump in.
Yeah.
You're talking about the collaboration component, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I want to sort of call out to, I guess, both researchers and analysts listening to this podcast, or even watching other people on Twitter engaging in work like this, to, you know, just start asking people if they'd be willing to collaborate. I'm notorious for just basically not leaving people alone. With John, I basically was like, hey, John, you're going to do this. And I was like, all right. And that's literally how easy it was for us. Mind you, we had that relationship because of Can-SEBP That being said, that relationship started somewhere, and that started with me just DMing him on Twitter and saying, hey, are you interested in getting involved in this? I noticed that you're an analyst, you're interested in evidence-based policing, why not? Here's what I would like if you could get involved. And so, I mean, the worst case scenario, let's say a researcher reaches out to an analyst at a specific agency and asks if they're interested in a project or asks if we can collaborate to get some data, and they say no. Okay, right? You tried, you put your name out there, and you never know what could happen. Even a year later, they might be like, listen, I thought of you, I have access to data now that give you the clearance, or I'd be interested in this project now, maybe I'm more comfortable with it. But a no doesn't necessarily mean a door closed. It could be an opportunity later down the line, or it could just be a connection that you can interact with and network with on Twitter and connect to their network and connect to more people. So I know that people always ask, like, how do I start brokering these research relationships? And my advice is to just talk to them. Most people don't bite. Most people are pretty friendly. And if the worst case scenario is a no or someone ignores you, who cares, right? You can move on and try someone different. And so, like I said, I do understand that John and I had that background with Can-SEBP, but for relationship brokering and research brokering, it literally is just not a matter of putting in that effort and making those connections yourself. And I highly advocate for the use of social media for that, because then you don't have to walk up to someone at a conference and be like, hi, my name's Lorna, and then you're in a room with like 500 people and it's uncomfortable. So it's a safe way to do it. And like I said, there's very little negative outcomes to it. And at the end of the day, you could benefit greatly from it. So that's how John and I got started, is just me messaging him. And that's how John's got started with his analyst stuff as well. And his analyst network is just connecting with people and messaging them. So that's my little spiel on that front, because I think research brokering is extremely important for advancing scholarship. And I know that it will be extremely important from a policing perspective to doing better practices, getting rid of things that are not effective, and implementing things that will do better for the community and the organization as a whole.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think as a piece of it, sometimes probably in the past, when you get an email or a phone call from a researcher and people are like, no, thanks anyway, we don't want to do it. And it obviously is not great, but you guys are cold calling and trying to do what you can in order to drum up the data sets. Whereas analysts probably have questions about their own data, or how to do this, or how to research something better, or how to whatever it might be. And that is, I think, a pivotal point for analysts, where, as we've discussed on the show in a sense, and right now you reach out, you as an analyst, if you have a question about your data, find a researcher, find a school, a university, somebody who's doing the work, and reach out to that department at the very least. Or if you get lucky, use Twitter. I find is a great tool to find academia and people of obviously like-mindedness in some form or another, but academia is on there to generate some great information. They share a whole bunch of research topics that are already out there, including the stuff they've done. So not only just have the researcher do it, but analysts start doing that as well. I don't know, John, if you wanted to add something too.
Yeah, and I mean, on that same point too, like Nick, you and I both know that like within crime analysis work, law enforcement analysis type work, like some of us are tired of like, being the general kind of bean counters, we're producing statistics left, right, and center. And really like my passion in policing is about making that change and creating that action type research. So, I mean, when I look through data and I try to explain our profession to people, I tell them, if you think of me as like the go-to stats guy, I'm going to lose my mind, because I'm not there to provide you with stats. I'm there to help you problem solve a specific issue. So what I would challenge analysts to do is to not just, as you say, maybe it might not be the greatest thing to, have this moment where, we end up getting like cold calls from researchers. But the flip side, like you said, was for analysts to start having these critical kind of thoughts about, the data that they have in their systems and also the problems that their agencies are facing, And rather than just sitting around, crunching numbers all day long, reach out to a researcher to see what you could actually do in a different kind of way and understand the problem. So then you can go back to your agency and say, you know what, it's more than just actually what the numbers are. I'm going to research this topic a little bit more for you, and we're going to base it off of the data that we have in-house. So then the stuff that we end up having is evidence-based based off of the context within your jurisdiction. And that's what I find most exciting about these kind of analyst researcher partnerships. It's not just about some random theoretical, proposition of some sort. It's about action type of research that's going to make a difference for your own agency. And it's not just going to be sitting on a shelf, which is the other thing that drives analysts crazy, is when you do work and it just sits there on the shelf. This is not the type of work that we're talking about when we're chatting about evidence-based policing.
Yeah, I think you made that a great point, and that the key word that triggered for me in that point was problem solving, right? And that's really the drive. I mean, we can pull numbers, and that's easy stuff to do, and most people in most programs can, but it's that problem solving, and that aspect of then thinking outside the box should be us reaching out to people from different institutions, and not just sometimes academia, but to solve a problem. It may not be something within a law enforcement realm. It may be something that has to come from your town's agency that deals with giving out business licenses to the town, right? But like work outside of your realm to get the information you need to solve a problem, in a sense. So yeah, that's we're putting calls to action in before we even get to the end of this for everybody. So to jump back to the project, the preliminary findings. So before we do, I just have a quick question. I know you said you're trying to get more out of this survey. What sort of things are you asking within the survey? And is it just Canadian agencies you're looking to solicit data from, or can people from abroad? Because thankfully, we are heard internationally. So we can probably generate more if we can.
Yeah, so it's not Canadian based, it's North American based. We're focusing more broadly to get more participants. And the types of questions we're asking are kind of broad. So we first start out looking at what the role of analysts are, what their role is, sorry, let me start again, what their role is, what their perception is of police missing persons work and the analyst's involvement in it. Then we move towards, is there potential for more involvement, or should there be different involvement of analysts in police missing persons work? And then we ask them their perceptions of how analysts can contribute to missing persons work. So it's broad and it's narrow at the same time. We're trying to capture as much data as possible because both John and I don't know what all analysts think about missing persons work. And so the more questions that we ask that are broad, the more information we can extract from a different or broader lens. And then right now we're focused on the role and use of analysts in missing persons work, but any researcher and any analyst that's been involved in research will tell you that projects tend to spiral. And so you started with one idea and then they go like 8,000 different ways. So did I get all the questions there, John? Was there anything else that Yeah, so if analysts are interested in participating, it's a really broad study and it's anonymized, so your information's not taken. We literally only ask you what your role is. So are you an intelligence analyst? Are you a crime analyst? Like what are you? Yeah, so that's the only information we capture. And then the rest is just about your experiences with missing persons work, your role, how you've been utilized by your agency, if you've been utilized by your agency for this field, and what your perceptions are of the potential for, your use in missing persons work.
That's awesome. So what do you have now for preliminary findings of this so far?
I'll let John answer that one.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of like some of the stuff that I've been able to notice is, like I said, none of this stuff was really too surprising to me. I did this one time as a really bad idea, just as a small sidetrack, but I opened the floor up at a conference, at one of the IACP conferences, about data quality, and that was a really bad idea because it turned out to be a ranting session. And to some extent, there was a little bit of ranting in some of the results that we ended up finding, but really, like, that demonstrates to me a certain level of frustration that when we're putting out a call and, asking analysts to participate in this project, it's important because what this ends up doing, and this is the exciting piece that I find about working with researchers, is that it lends a voice to what crime analysts have been feeling all over the world. And, yeah, our study right now is North American focused, but this is stuff that's all over the world. I'm quite confident about it. So what we did end up initially kind of finding is that, again, it depends on the agency that you're specifically working for. So some folks have very extensive types of experiences, while others have very minimal. But what I did notice was that a lot of the work that analysts were doing were very much tactical, very short-term investigative type work, and that's perfectly fine. So I mean, examples would be, most kind of the biggest piece of it was involving like open source searches and looking and understanding relationships between different people, cell phone analysis, mapping, reviewing video surveillance, creating weekly reports on juvenile runaways, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, one of the best ways, I guess, from a tactical investigative perspective is not just these like kind of small pieces like here and there, doing a cell phone analysis here, doing, open source search here and there, but really, like, one analyst had noted that a full victimology profile needs to be created to help investigators. And the conversation before in the past has been about when to put your analyst into an investigation. And it doesn't matter whether it comes down to like missing people work or any other type of investigative work. Every analyst that I know of recommends to have your analyst start out at the very beginning of the project, rather than like halfway through and you're scrambling to figure out exactly what's going on. That does not help whatsoever. But that being said, so that's very much like the tactical investigative part of it. And I find that that's kind of important to help investigators kind of move forward in their project and doing some of the legwork for them, doing some of that administrative kind of component for them, while officers, detectives can go out there to do the actual physical type work, and we can lend our administrative support and do kind of the background work behind it. But the thing that I would also encourage people is that one thing that I kind of read recently, it really was kind of profound to me, was analysts need to, in analytical work, really needs to guide policing rather than simply supporting policing. So I understand this component of, helping investigators engage in, figuring out exactly kind of what's going on with that missing person. But really, that is very much like reactive. And yeah, we've got to take care of that portion of it. But the critique behind current policing right now is that it's very much responsive and it's very reactive. So some folks have argued for the fact that, we need to balance this a little bit more out, look at some of the more strategic pieces behind it. And for me, the biggest piece of it is the prevention piece, right? Like, a lot of police agencies focus so much on what can we do after the fact, after the person's gone missing. But some very progressive agencies are looking at factors that contribute to missing people work or missing people incidences. And I think that's where working with a researcher can really, really help in terms of understanding the context of your situation. Because in terms of like missing people work, when we're talking about why is this important, not only because of the fact that it could potentially be like a harm situation, quality of life situation, but the reality for policing is that it's resource intensive as well. So, I mean, why don't we try to look upstream a little bit more and figure out what are some of the contributing factors in understanding the bigger picture behind missing people? So that's kind of like what we've kind of been noticing in terms of like some of the preliminary findings. But the other thing I wanted to highlight was that, a lot of the times we're talking about like missing people, like, chronic runaways, but that kind of thing. But some of the findings that we ended up finding at the very beginning so far is that there's a wide range, and I'm sure Lorna's noticed this in the work that she's been doing, is that there's a wide variety of, different categories of missing people. I mean, you can range from like, a missing toddler to like a missing adult, to elderly individuals, to chronic runaways, to kidnappings. And then, you're getting into situations of like victims of sex trafficking and organized crime. Like, fortunately, we don't have that as frequently in the jurisdiction that I work in, but I mean, it is a huge reality for some other places. So there's a wide variety of different types of things that analysts could be potentially involved in. And that's where I think this work can be really helpful, because it demonstrates the wide breadth that could potentially be examined. So in addition to that, let's see, like I had mentioned before, is about the prioritization of whether missing people is important for that specific agency. And that really demonstrates whether or not, like, what type of resourcing that you're going to end up having for your analysts, like whether, they do it ad hoc, or whether they're dedicated to a specific unit. Because the ones that I have found where the agency prioritizes missing people, they've got missing people not only like as a priority, but they've got missing people units, they've got missing people investigators. And then in addition to that, if they're really smart about it, is that they add in an analyst to help support their investigators, rather than allowing their investigators to do all the work like that they could potentially do, when really analysts can do some investigative work, but we're really good at the technical piece of it. And we could technically, like from an investigative perspective, build that full victimology profile, which really, if you want to let an investigator do all of that stuff, go right ahead. But I mean, you could save a lot of time just by having an analyst to do some of that background work for you, and to have an investigator go knock on doors, have conversations with people. That is not the role of an analyst. We can do all that background work. And then the other piece of it is kind of looking at some of the potential work. And that's where, again, we can learn from other experiences from other agencies. So for instance, if you're just responsible for collecting, weekly reports on missing, repeat juvenile missing people, you could potentially be doing things like social network analysis, timelines, risk assessments. I know for a fact that none of that stuff is being done in some agencies. So I mean, these are pieces of gold that other agencies have been doing, that unless we share this knowledge and unless we share this research, other agencies are just not going to know what's going on and what could potentially be done. The other thing, the very last thing that we kind of wanted to look at, was in terms of some of the boundaries that analysts experience. And again, some of this stuff is already known, but I wanted to kind of really pull that out there as like another example as to what, again, this is kind of where the ranting piece of it comes along from some of the analysts. And I mean, we're looking at things about, the culture of policing. And this is, again, not about all policing agencies, but this is something that police leaders need to be very much aware of. And then tying into like the physical part of it. So we're talking about like data structures and availability of data, because really the sky's the limit in terms of like what type of analysis that you could potentially be doing. But if you don't have that data, again, if your agency is not prioritizing missing people work, you're just not going to have the data to do it. You can do all the number crunching that you want, but you're never really going to be solving the problem unless you actually have the data. So in relation to that, there's always been critiques about, why is it that crime analysis hasn't been fully integrated in the policing? And part of that comes down to not just cultural piece of it, but capacity and resourcing, allowing for consistent, potentially like 24-hour coverage, because there's no time limit as to when missing people go missing. Buy-in with investigators, technological pieces, whether they've got all the tools available to them to do all of the great analytical work that could be happening. And to Nick, to your point in terms of like, policing, and to Lorna's point, policing being the only individuals being involved in missing people work, that's obviously not the case. But when we start moving towards, looking at interesting, more useful pieces of information, like let's say from health or social services, that's when we start running into issues of like data sharing and privacy and all that kind of stuff. That becomes like another boundary for analysts to really create that victimology profile. And a couple more things is like related to the capacity and then the resourcing and the critique of why crime analysts are not involved in policing as much as they really should be, is about the lack of training. So, I mean, if analysts don't know how to do social network analysis, timelines, association charts, risk assessments, that's another huge piece that, you know, analysts need to be able to have that skill set to be able to do that kind of work. But the last thing that some analysts have noted is that it's the not just the understanding from the analysts, but the agencies itself about how individuals who do go missing are not just missing people, but they do have like a personal identity to themselves, and they come with different experiences and different cultures. And part of that comes down to agencies understanding, for instance, you know, in certain kind of cultures, like why is it that the person's gone missing, or what types of stressors do they experience, and it contributes to why they're going missing. We need to understand that perspective as well. So yeah, that's kind of some of the preliminary findings that we were able to look at so far.
Yes.
And Lorna, if there's anything else that you want to add, feel free to.
You covered it. I mean, as you can see, it's underdeveloped. It's an area that we've not thought about. We've not made the connection. But there's so much potential. And like hearing from analysts and their perceptions of this really point to there being a potential, like potentially a great issue here that could contribute to making police missing persons work easier, more effective, more efficient, and then more streamlined, so that people, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's about putting someone in like the quickest possible amount of time in the best condition. And so it could be a matter of life or death in certain situations. And that's not to dramatize it. I do understand that a lot of missing persons cases are more mundane than these like dramatized situations. But there's that one case that hits the headlines, or it's a bigger case that's blown out of proportion, but the person ends up dying, or they end up experiencing harm, or there's some broader implication, and that's when the reactive policing or the responsive policing becomes a fault, because we start to recognize that, okay, if we were proactive about this and started thinking about this ahead of time, maybe we could have not ended up in this bad situation, but now we're dealing with a bad situation, a loss of life, or someone experiencing harm, and that's where analysts can even prevent that. Not only can they prevent it, but they can reduce the likelihood of that happening. But analysts can play a great role in police missing persons work. We're starting to see that already in our preliminary findings, and I think that space and that understanding can actually improve police missing persons work, and we may have ended up tapping into something quite major. So we'll see what happens, but I'm very excited about what we're finding out so far.
Yeah, I think it's great the work that you guys are doing, and just even piggybacking off of Laura Huey's episode recently and doing mental health work. Very much similar in a sense, and I don't know if it's because I'm in the right circles, which is a good thing, but all analysts that I've spoken with and the researchers that have been working with them are geared towards that focus, that goal of not only finding out what's going on, but making it and pushing it to a point, just like Dr. Lawrence Sherman speaks of that crime harm index, right? And a lot of, from what I understand, the UK and speaking to some of their analysts, they're working towards and on that harm aspect. So once we have an understanding of what's going on with the data and incorporating the analysts into the mix and getting things done, how can we actually then address it to reduce this issue? So that way it's not, and I guess it's a bad way to paint it in a sense, but it's not drawing on the resources of law enforcement, who usually are not really completely equipped to handle such an event, right? I mean, they have the investigative tools and they have the ability to tap into cell phones and do what they can to track somebody down. But really, as we all know, there's something else going on when somebody does become a runaway, a missing person. And we don't want them, obviously, to get to that point where they become somebody involved in human trafficking at that point. And so the analysts, the researchers, the two of you working on this to generate the knowledge at that point to understand the idea and get to that point of finally saying, hey, not only what's going on, but how do we work as a collective, academia, law enforcement, social services, and healthcare, and whomever else needs to get involved to just help these people, become and stay involved in society effectively and be treated as a human and respected across the board. So it's a great thing actually to watch and continue to work on and see that is actually the goal, not like, oh, well, we just need to reduce numbers and it's a cost driven effort and that kind of that traditional aspect.
Those are definitely important, and like we don't negate that. We understand that we need to look at it from that lens too, because that's the language that they talk, right? And it's how to get things moving. But as a researcher, I've not been doing policing research for long. I mean, I'm only in the second year of my PhD, but I've already noticed that crime analysts or analysts more broadly are left out of the conversation a lot. And that can be problematic because it's a resource that police can use, have at their, have available to do work with and collaborate with, but are underutilized and undertapped into this stuff. And so, resources are a constant issue, as you just brought up. But if there's that resource that's available, and clearly from our preliminary findings, they're willing and wanting to get involved in this type of work, and I'm sure much more type of work, why not? Like, what's the worst case scenario is that you have another report to read, or, from my lens, it's like a cost benefit analysis in my head going on, like, why wouldn't you try? And so another thing that you had brought up is that collaboration component and starting to get the conversation going. And I'll put a little plug out here and say, like, the Missing Persons Research Hub, its goal is to start that conversation, because it doesn't matter if, let's say, you're doing great work, Nick, and John, you're doing great work in your area. So, but then that's pockets, and I'm doing great work over here, but we're not talking. Like, you've got pockets of research, pockets of great work over here. And so what? Can we really generate effective and monumental change if we're not talking to each other about the pockets of great work that we're doing in our areas? And so where the Missing Persons Research Hub comes in, and I'll put this out there to anyone listening, connect with the hub and see what's going on. We have police personnel, health and social services involved. We have community practitioners and community organizations. We have researchers. We have the Government of Canada. We have the National Centre for Missing Persons. They're going to take a look at it and see what's going on. So it's trying to get everyone in that kind of like centralized location. And so, and I mean, internationally, those in America and in the UK are welcome to join too. It's not just specific to Canada. We just do have focus on the Canadian context, but it doesn't really matter if you're doing great work in your area if you're not getting that work into the hands of the people that need it. And so one of the clear goals of John and I is not only to take the experiences and the perceptions and the opinions we've gathered from analysts in the survey and publish from it, but we also want to implement that into agencies. So we have plans to talk to agencies, present to agencies. We're going to create some briefs and some blogs, come on podcasts like this to talk about it, because him and I both share the same perception that it doesn't matter if we publish in a journal behind a paywall, it's not going to do anything. So we do want to note that it's not just an academic study, it's a study that we intend on putting into action and getting into the hands of the people that need to hear about it. So yeah, that's my rant on that part too.
I think that's a great one. A study to be put into action. I think that's perfect. And the people with passion, that is exactly what they absolutely despise the paywall for whatever purpose and reason, right? But it's because you guys do all this work, you put in all this time and effort, and how horrible is it that it gets stored away and thrown on a shelf in the Library of Congress or wherever, massive collection and archive there might be, to almost never be heard from again, unfortunately, and put into place, see if it works, right? So I'm glad that you mentioned that. That's a perfect statement. Yeah,
it's a culture thing in academia too. Like, a lot of the junior scholars or early career researchers are even criticized for using social media and going on podcasts, because the gold standard in academia as publications, but I don't just want that. I don't think that that's the kind of impact I want to seek with my work. I want my impact to look like actionable change and partnerships and talking to the people that I'm trying to generate research for. And, applied research is what they call it. And there is definitely a culture shift happening in academia, just as there is in policing with analysts and getting analysts more involved in policing work. So I think it's great that it's happening, but it's kind of like the old world and the new world coming through a head. But I think that people that jump on podcasts like this, I do have that bias, because even the people that generate research and have their articles behind a paywall are most likely not going to come on a podcast and talk about their work. So it's just about, doing work that generates change, because there's no point, in my opinion, this is very much so my opinion, there's no point in really doing my work if I'm not going to get it out to the people that need to hear about it.
Yeah. It's writing the greatest novel and never publishing it for anybody to read, right?
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, it's a great analogy.
So, all right. So with that, as we wrap this up, I know we went over a lot of topics and calls to action, in a sense, interlaced throughout this whole thing. So, Lorna, let's start with you. Just a quick call to action to wrap this up.
Okay. So I guess I'll say two things. One, if you're an analyst and you're interested in getting involved in this study, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And even if you just have questions or comments or anything, you don't have to participate in the survey, but if you just want to connect with us, please do that. So call to action number one, get involved in the study if you can, or at least connect with us if not. And then call to action number two is something I've talked about like 5 times already in this podcast, but to collaborate and get involved and share your work. So like I talked about earlier, the Missing Persons Research Hub is up and live. And if you have work that you want to share, get out there, connect with me, and I'll happily showcase it. And that's specific to missing persons, but nonetheless, let's all get connected and let's all get talking.
Good. And John, your call to action for us again. We got 2 already and 1,700 others, I'm sure, in there, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo what Lorna said in terms of the first part. I mean, obviously, we want to get the voices of analysts out there because, I mean, really, like, I'm getting to the point where, we've done enough ranting. I've gone to enough analyst conferences and, I've heard a lot of analysts kind of ranting about, what's going on in their agency, but this is truly an opportunity for you to lend your voice to research. And we need to build that greater voice in terms of like multiple different types of studies to explain to police leaders, this is kind of the state of your organization. This is the state of an untapped resource that you have that is tremendous. And you really need to kind of pay a little closer attention to that. But the second piece that I would say is very similar before in terms of like the research partnerships. And my biggest advocacy point in terms of like even running Can-SEBP and the fact that, Lorna, Dr. Huey and Can-SEBP as a whole, I'm very appreciative of what they've been able to provide a platform for me to speak on behalf of analysts, is the fact that I would like analysts to take more of a leading position in terms of like pushing evidence-based policing and research, because really like we might be the only people who really understand where this research needs to go. We can't sit around for our police leaders to say, hey, you know what, missing people should be a priority. It comes down to potentially us working with researchers to frame a problem within the context of your jurisdiction to say, you know what, by the way, this is actually a problem and this is exactly what's going on. Because in working with police leaders for a number of years, like in some cases, they're just so busy to not know really like what the full scope of what's going on in their agency is. This is a great opportunity for analysts to not just sit back and crunch numbers all day. They can say, hey, boss, you know what, this is actually a problem and this is what we could do about it. I've worked with this researcher. We've looked at the full scope of this. These are 3 potential solutions that we could implement right now. And I think any policing leader or manager would be very happy to hear something like that. So I would encourage analysts to reach out take that leadership position, even though you're not formally a leader, take that opportunity to reach out to researchers and get that work started.
Yeah. Awesome points. Thank you both so much for coming on. I appreciate it once again. This has been not only fantastic in terms of missing persons, but seeing the collaboration. I think that's should be inspiring and motivational to a lot of analysts and researchers to kind of find, reach out, find it, network it, grab a hold of it, and run with it, because it just becomes that much better of not only the research being involved, but then finally an aspect of implementation that can take place. So with that, thank you very much again, and everybody, we will catch you next time on NIRO Knowledge.
Thanks, Nick.
Another great episode of NIRO Knowledge. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite service. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at nick@niroca.com. It is nick@niroca.com.